Welcome to Recalibrate. This is a podcast of Caribou Road Christian Fellowship. Our hope is to create a moment where you get to take a look at your life through the lens of Christ's teaching and recalibrate.
Well, welcome back to Recalibrate. Last time we were talking together, we were talking about James's admonition and encouragement to us to persevere in trials, because when we do, even if they are long, if we endure them and we do well in them, we will receive a victor's crown that is life itself. James realizes, though, that we don't always succeed. Truth be known, most trials, there will be moments at the very least, and even seasons in those trials, where actually we fail, we fall. Not in terms of our faith or holding on to God, but in terms of our behavior, in terms of our thoughts, in terms of our actions. There are moments in this season with the pandemic that my behavior and my actions, I'm not proud of them. They weren't good. They weren't appropriate. The trial was long, the trial was hard, and in the midst of it, there were moments when I indulged in the flesh and things were not good. I'm speaking for myself. I don't need to speak for you, because I know you can speak for yourself on this issue. And the fact of the matter is that in all the different kinds of trials we face in life, there will be moments in it and aspects to it where we will be severely tested. Our character will be tested. There is a difference between the word trial and the word test. Have you noticed that? We talk about going through a trial, but we talk about being tested. It's a sense that a trial is something which is not necessarily brought by anybody or anything. It can literally be a circumstance of life. These Jewish believers have had to flee, and as a result of that fleeing, they were facing all kinds of difficulties. It wasn't a singular attack on their lives, even by the enemy. It was a season of trial. It could be to do with the death of a loved one. It could be to do with a downturn in the economy. It could be for a number of reasons that we go through trials, and we all face them because we're all part of a world that is always moving, and we have physical bodies that sometimes fail. Testing, on the other hand, is much more personal. It seems to have a personality even behind it. I'm facing a trial, but I am being tested. I'm going through a trial, but I'm being tested. Who's testing you? Well, when you look into the scripture, and we're going to look at James today, the test could come from a different number of different places. 3, in fact. 1 is that God is testing you. That in the midst of your trial, there is an extra pressure, extra focus that is testing your character and your moral decisions, and God is doing that. The second place that the test might actually be coming from, that tests your character and tests your decisions and your behavior, could be the devil, Satan, and they are forces of darkness, are there prodding, poking, provoking to try and get you to behave a certain way, and you're severely tempted and tested. James advocates that the place where the testing really comes from is from within yourself. That as you go through trials, internally what happens is the heat is turned up. And when the heat is turned up, what is inside you will come out. What is inside you will be manifested. And so the test is a test to reveal what is on the inside of you. Trials happen. They happen to everybody because we live in a world where it's fallen and things are broken, and we go through difficult seasons from the environment and the world around us. The testing that happens in that pressure is the testing of our character. And so listen to what James says then. Let's go back and read exactly what he says. He says, when you are tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So he just said, listen, blessed are those who endure, they'll be given the crown of life. But, he says, when you're tempted as you go through a trial, I don't want anybody to say that God is tempting me, or God is another translations will use the word testing. When you are tested, no one should say God is testing me or God is tempting me. Really amazing and really deep, profound truths coming out here. But when you are tempted, it's your own evil desires that are tempting you, and you are dragged away by them and enticed. Then, after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. So James here is saying, when we go through trials and difficult times in our lives, be ready, because you are going to be tested in terms of your character, in terms of the way you behave, in the terms of even your faith. But he really wants to make sure we understand it's not God doing this. When your character is assailed, when you're really in the midst of a difficult time and you're really wanting to lash out at people, you're really wanting to go off the rails and just disappear or act out in some way through alcohol or through violence or through sexual inappropriateness or through just curling up in a ball and just watching TV all day. When we're tempted to just kind of act out in the middle of these trials, James is saying it's not God behind this. It's not God actually bringing the test. The trial is there. And it's not God himself who's tempting you or testing you. When you feel testing, when you feel temptation, it's 100% you. Now, James doesn't say it here, but Paul will tell you. And the enemy advocating it, pushing it, prodding it, bringing it out. Maybe the best way that I could give an illustration to this is with the Garden of Eden. The original temptation. Did God tempt Adam and Eve? Now, some people would argue he did. And I would put it this way. They would say, why did God even put a fruit tree that was desirable in the middle of the garden and tell them not to touch it? If you tell a child not to touch the cookie jar, isn't it the parent that's put the temptation in the way of the child? Isn't the parent, in a way, testing the child by putting them in a situation where there's a big possibility that they will actually fail? Wouldn't it be simpler for the parent to put the cookie jar away in the cupboard and completely close it up? And I think that when we go through life, this mentality, this way of thinking really does linger, and it's actually in many of us. It manifests that when we go through difficult trials, we often blame our behavior and our reaction to the trial on the intensity of the trial. I am behaving this way because I am just so stressed. I am behaving this way because life has just mistreated me and I'm getting back. I'm behaving this way because this is the only way I can find joy and peace in the midst of this circumstance. We often justify our behavior by blaming the circumstances. I think that's what the non-believer does, because they probably really don't have a relationship with God to be able to blame God. But there are times in my life, honestly, when I've gone through a really difficult trial and I have found myself not doing so well, that I say, God, why are you testing me? Why are you putting me in a situation where I am just feeling the heat so much? Why are you putting me? Have you ever said those words? Why are you putting me through this? Why are you making me suffer this way? And in essence, we are saying, why are you tempting me? Why are you testing me? Why are you provoking me? So let's go back to the Garden of Eden, because this mentality is why people even get angry with God. Why people even have resentment towards God, especially when they fail and their lives are really affected by the decisions they've made. They are angry that God actually put them in those circumstances. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden then. God put a tree in the middle, and he made it desirable, and he told them not to touch it. But because they were childlike, that in itself can provoke curiosity, can provoke a desire to even cross the boundary. But if God had not put the tree in the garden, Adam and Eve would not have been human. They would have been machines. They would have just lived with no sense of free will. The one single choice they had was the choice to obey God around that tree. And as long as they obeyed God around that tree, they were exercising free will, and they were free agents, and they were what God wanted them to be, creative beings who were like him. And as long as they obeyed, they still walked in righteousness, free will, but untainted, holy, righteous, good. Wow, that was God's desire for us, not to be robots, but to be agents of free will, but who have submitted our free will to the Heavenly Father because we believe. So, like a parent would leave the cookie jar out, assuming the best, believing the best, wanting the best, God left the tree in there because he wanted them to be mature and make decisions that showed their freedom of choice, but at the same time showed their desire to serve and honor and walk in his ways. Of course, there was great risk to that, wasn't there? And they did, in fact, come to that tree. It's interesting that when they came to the tree, a word that comes up in the original, in the Hebrew, and then translated into the Greek Septuagint, is this word desire. She looked at Eve at the fruit and found it desirable. And in this passage by James that we just started reading, he goes on and says, but each person is tempted by their own desires, being dragged away and enticed by them. So Eve felt desire for something that she knew was intrinsically wrong. But the desire was so strong. And then secondly, we see the enemy come and bring lies and deception. The enemy tempted her. Actually, it wasn't the enemy tempted, it was the desire was tempting her, and the enemy was amplifying it. And that's how it works in our lives, doesn't it? When we're in trials, when we're in difficulty, I think of people who, and I'm using an extreme case here, and I don't want to let any of us off the hook, but in an extreme case, they are in a very difficult time in their lives. Their marriage is strained, their home life is strained, their finances are strained, and they meet somebody at work, and the person at work is very attractive and very cool and very caring and has all the things that they're looking for, and desire grows. They desire to be with that person. And as that desire grows, the enemy is there to provoke it and increase it and to manipulate it. Is it God who put that person in the office? No. Is it God that caused the trial in the marriage? No. This is the circumstances of life. Marriages go through seasons of blessing and seasons where you got to work out issues. Economics change. People make poor choices with their finances. The tension and trial in the marriage is not God ordained or God made. It's part of being in this world and the difficulties we face. The individual at the office who is so attractive and amazing, is it coincidental? Did God arrange for that person to be there? Not necessarily. You could have met another person there. There could have been multiple people you could have met in multiple locations. There is a desire in that individual to get out of the stress of that circumstance. And this desire then latches onto somebody and they begin to fantasize and think about the person. Now, I'm using an extreme case, but I think it's a great case because it really clearly illustrates to us how it works. And then, of course, once the desire is birthed, James goes on and says, then that desire being conceived gives birth to sin, and that sin, having matured, gives birth to death. You notice the two difference? Before he talked about the crown of life, now he's talking about death. The crown of life is those who endure and recognize that there will be temptations, and they are looking to themselves and to their sinful nature and for their ability to be deceived, and to resist that and to be aware of that and to be broken about that they might go through the trial and not be trapped in a temptation, a way of escape, a different way of thinking, a carnal approach, an ungodly approach. The temptation could be in trials like COVID at home. Home marriages break up because now people are just lashing out and getting angry and behaving inappropriately. And this desire to act out now gives birth to sin, and sin gives birth to death. Death in the marriage, death in the home, death in their walk with God. Well, there's a lot in this passage, isn't there? I think the big takeaway that James is really wanting to get across to us is that the trial itself is not really of God as such, and the intense pressure to sin and the temptations that we face and the falls that we have in the midst of it, we can't turn around and say, oh God, you caused that. It was because you made this situation so difficult. No, the situation is revealing the brokenness inside our lives that needs to be healed and changed and fixed. God's not tempting or testing us, only in the sense that that trial reveals our character flaw. But when God tests, it's to then allow us to make the change and to bring the healing and redemption in our lives. When we blame God or we blame the circumstances, we never look inwardly to recognize the flaws that lie within us. We're always blaming other things. And therefore we never change. Trials never change us, and they never improve us, and they never bring life. So here we are, people of God. Our role in these trials, when we feel the intense temptation and desires and flaws growing within us, is to recognize our brokenness and call upon the Lord to help us. He will come to the humble in a time of need, and He will lift them up. Trials are dangerous. They do reveal some ugly stuff, but through the grace of Jesus Christ, God has not designed them or allowed them for our destruction, but rather for our purification and sanctification. The Lord bless you.
We want to thank you for joining us on Recalibrate today. For more information, please check out our website at crcfchurch.com.
Let your kingdom come, let your will